Bob and Rosita, hi there.
Yeah, we're here.
Hello, everybody. So it's lovely to see you all. We're all here today for a talk from Philip Aubury, who used to work at Birmingham Botanical Gardens for 20 years. And the topic today is successful fruit growing. And today's talk has been arranged by the Snitterfield Garden Club, so thank you very much to them. Now, I don't know if you remember, a number of weeks ago, I asked people a question as part of the quiz, who gets their 5 a day? And everybody at the screen was waving their hand saying, yes, I get my 5 a day. But then I asked you, can you tell me and quantify how much is actually in a portion? But not many people could actually tell me. So we established that you actually weren't getting your 5 a day. And if you work it out, you need to be eating almost half a kilo. So who's had half a kilo of fruit and veg today?
Easily.
Yeah, not many people. But yeah, so hopefully after today's talk, everybody will be encouraged to plant a bit more fruit and eat it themselves. Right then, so we're ready for the few quiz questions. Now, last time I was accused of making them far too easy. So obviously this time they're going to get a little bit harder. So first question. Taxonomists are constantly changing the names of plants. So this is the new name for a particular plant. And I'm not even going to try and, okay, well, Anamananthle laceronia, owner. What was its original name, or what is its common name?
Oh, God.
So answers at the end.
Next one.
Next question on the fruit theme. So you can get grafted fruit trees and roses grafted onto rose rootstocks. If you get a grafted pear tree and then you get a fruiting sucker, what will you get?
Do you mean a graft?
It says grated.
Don't shout out.
Well, it's grated.
You've got grated.
You should say grafted.
You get a lot of squirrels eating the fruit.
So I meant grafted fruit tree.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah. So okay, moving on to the third question. So do you remember last time we were talking about fish oil supplements, and I was saying they're really important for you, very good for you. And I showed you this picture, and in order to have the same amount that you would normally have with a spoonful of the old fish oil, you'd have to eat between 7 and 27 of those tablets on the left, and apparently they're called the 1 a day tablets. So my question today is, if you're a vegetarian, what can you do instead of having fish oil tablets? So just a couple of bits and bobs. There's a new TV program on this weekend, if anybody's interested, a gardening program. It's on Channel 4 at Saturday 8 p.m. It's called The Great Garden Revolution. So if you're interested, set your recorders for Saturday 8 p.m. on Channel 4. For those who are local to where we are, we're arranging a plant swap in May, so people can bring plants along and swap them for something else. We ran 3 last year, and they're all outdoors, socially distanced. They worked really well. So if you're local to where we are, then feel free to come down. I will put a post up with the exact date on our Facebook page, but it is weather dependent because obviously it's outdoors, so we might need to delay it if we get rain showers. Now, don't forget, if you're growing daffs in your garden, it's time to feed them. So make sure that's part of your weekly regime. And I've been asked by a few people to remind everybody of what the apps were that I demonstrated. So the Plant ID app I showed before was called Google Lens. The National Garden Scheme app is the NGS app, which you can, again, get for free. And the Weather and Radar app was the other app where I showed you how you can figure out whether it's going to rain in the garden, so you can run out and, bring your washing in or whatever. And that was called Weather and Radar. And the other thing I've been asked about is, I talked about vitamin D a number of weeks ago, about how important that is as a vitamin, and I recommend people get tested at this time of year, March and April, because it's the lowest part of the season. You're coming out of winter, and a few people asked me what sort of symptoms they need to look out for. So I thought I'd just show you a few things. Now, there's lots of things that people could put down to vitamin D, but these are just a few of the examples. So muscle weakness, bone, joint, or just general aches and pains, frequent colds, low immune system, fatigue, tiredness. So any of these kind of things can be attributed to vitamin D deficiency. So that's what to watch out for. Make yourselves I'm sure you get yourselves tested. You can get it done from your doctors, or you can order it from one of those online web suppliers. I sent the details to you on email. So I'm going to run through one question as usual. how many of you have actually visited Birmingham Botanical Gardens? So it's going to come up on your screen in a second, the poll is, and there's 3 answers. Either yes, you've been, number 2, no, but you do know about it, or number 3, no, you never knew about it. So it's going to come up on your screen now. So if you want to vote, click the relevant button and then click the submit button.
Well, years ago. I don't know.
Actually,
That's fun.
What have I done here?
yeah.
Oops. What's happened? This is what happened last time.
I'll give you a few more seconds. I can hear a lot of whispering going on in the background. So when you turn your microphones back on, we can hear everything that goes on.
Yes.
Right. Okay, I'll give you 2 more seconds. Brilliant. Okay, right, I'm going to stop that now. So I'm going to share the results with you. So 56% of people have been, 25% have not been, but they do know about it, and 20% didn't even know about it. Now I'm quite surprised at that figure.
Oh,
Dear, oh dear.
Yeah, very surprised.
amazing.
That is quite surprising, isn't it? Right. Okay. So thank you for that. I am now going to introduce Philip. So for those who don't know, there's a bit of background on Philip. He was a student at Birmingham Botanical Gardens originally. He then went off to study at Pears College. He then went to Dorset, where he was growing camellias and clematis. He then came back to Birmingham, joined the Parks Department as a lecturer. And then in 1987, he joined back again at Birmingham Botanical Gardens as the director. And he's had a few famous people going through the gardens. He's had the Queen Mother and a few world leaders, including US President Bill Clinton. And apparently, when Bill went back to the White House, he sent Philip a message with a picture that he'd had taken with Philip. So there's not many people that can say they've had a message from Bill Clinton, but Philip certainly can. Right, I'm going to ask you
Indy,
all to...
where on earth did you get that photo of me sat on a bench at Botanical Gardens? Dear, oh dear.
That's all right. Good.
It's quite a good picture. Right, so I'm asking you all to unmute yourselves. And can I ask you all, please, to give Philip a lovely round of applause. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, good evening. And Indy's done all my usual introductions, but I'm surprised that 20% of you haven't heard of the Birmingham Botanical Gardens. I've been retired now for nearly 20 years, so I do have a little bit more time to do talks. And it's been very strange. I've been doing talks for 50 years to find, well, what I thought was going to be about sort of 6 months, you know, March to sort of last autumn, and then I suddenly found the COVID pandemic went on a little, and by November I had to start doing my talks by Zoom. So a very good evening to you all. Tonight's subject, it's successful fruit growing. I will be taking the questions at the end. Indy's willing to monitor the chat room because I find that quite impossible while I'm doing a talk. So we will hopefully try and save some space at the end. There is a plant list of my recommended fruit trees, which I try to talk through at the end, but the fruit talk is quite long, and it may well be that you just end up having to download my list of talks. But in any case, we go to screen share now, and we'll pull up and start, hopefully. Successful fruit growing, grow your own 5 a day. And why do you want to grow your own fruit? Well, let's have a look at what fruit we're going to look at first of all, because we will be looking at strawberries, which are a fruit. We will be looking at rhubarb, which is a vegetable, but we won't be looking at tomatoes, which again are fruit, or runner beans or French beans or anything else. So it's fruit that's going to make your tart. Now, normally I ask if I'm doing this live, who grows fruit? I suppose if I go to gallery view and you all wave your hands in the air if you grow a reasonable amount of fruit. I'm getting a few hands waving. There we go. Okie doke. We'll go back to speaker view. You don't need a lot of space in order to grow fruit. Last night I was doing a talk on growing fruit and vegetables without any space at all, growing in pots and containers. But yes, you can get a decent amount of fruit in really quite a small space. And growing your own fruit is very rewarding. Your freshness is assured. It hasn't been sort of chilled and shipped halfway around the world. And also you're in charge of what goes on to the fruit that you're going to be eating. You're in control. My training back in the 60s at Pershore College of Horticulture, the historic spray programs we had then, thinking about the orchards, you'd start off in the winter by spraying them all with a tar or winter wash to kill all the baddies, but it killed all the goodies. As soon as the buds started to break in the spring, you put on a spray. At pink bud, when they were showing colour, which is about where we are now, you put on another spray. As soon as the bees had done their work and the petals had fallen, you put on another spray. And when the fruit was about the size of a 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres, you'd put on another spray. So heaven knows what you were eating by the time you got to harvest time. And I use virtually no sprays, insecticides or fungicides. I like to think of myself as fairly environmentally friendly, but given the amount of land we've got here in Alvechurch, south of Birmingham, I do still use weed killers. Okay, this is my lovely cherry tree on a dwarfing rootstock, and it's in the ground, and in spite of a very dry weather, it's doing remarkably well at the moment. Of course, against growing plants in pots, you've got to water, and if you're growing say an apple or a pear tree in a pot, you've only got to go on holiday for a fortnight, it dries out, and that's your whole crop gone. My strawberries are in a greenhouse in pots. We'll talk more about that later. And obviously they've got to be kept watered. And my wife has a very nice collection of citrus fruits. That's the lemon. And during the pandemic, she said, oh, can you pop down to the co-op and get me a lemon? I'm doing a lemon drizzle cake. I said, no, but I can get as far as the front garden. So you can, in actual fact, at the moment, I have 3 fruit marmalade for breakfast, which is made from the lemons, some limes, and some pink grapefruit. So very nice indeed. Okay, moving on then. Whatever you're growing, it does need full sun. No use trying to grow fruit in the shade of a big beech tree or something. The soil does need to be well drained. Well, here in Alvechurch, we live in the Brickworks manager's house, which tells you what the soil's like. It is very heavy clay, but over the 30 odd years that we've been here, we've done a lot to improve it. And one of the first things we did when we moved in was actually put some drains in to get the water out of the clay. Just at the moment, we don't actually need the drainage. The soil is cracking up, and desperate for the rain that they have told us we might get tonight. One thing you possibly have noticed in the last week, 10 days, is really the blossom's been coming on the trees, and we have had some really cold nights. They reckon that not only is this the driest April for I think the last time was back in the 1920s or something, but it also has been the coldest. Now, we've had some really nice warm sunny days, but at night we have had some really cold weather. And what you can get is, if you're looking at the left-hand picture here, if you've got a solid fence or wall, then the frost can literally collect behind that wall, behind that fence, and build up and take the blossom away. If you've got some holes, then the cold air can drain. We're quite lucky. We're on quite a decent slope here, and all the cold air does drain down to the Birmingham-Worcester Canal at the bottom of the garden. So avoid frost pockets. It does make a big difference in a year like we've got. As far as preparation is concerned, it really does pay to make sure the ground is weed free. One of my earliest memories of gardening is trying to get the couch grass out from underneath my parents' gooseberry bushes. Not the nicest occupation, so make sure it is weed free. Make sure you've added plenty of organic matter, good garden compost. And when I see people loading up their bins to have it carted away by the local council, I think, why? So compost your own, but otherwise, if you are having it taken away, then the organic matter from your local council of composted garden waste is great when it comes to not only planting, but also for mulching. And fertilizer, and more about that in a little while. When it comes to preparation, many of the, hopefully you can all see me moving the arrow around on the screen.
Yeah.
Most of the fruit that you will be planting these days will have been pot grown, and you'll be getting it from the local garden centre. In the winter, yes, you can get bare root fruit, and if you're planting an orchard, then it's much more economical, if you're planting a lot of trees, to have them bear root. But whenever you're planting fruit, or indeed any trees, out of a container, please, it's a square hole, particularly on a heavy soil like this. If you plant in a plant from a round pot in a round hole, you'll tend to have the roots go round and round in circles. So dig out a good square hole, break up the bottom, fork it over a little bit, add some organic matter to the bottom, and add some organic matter to the backfill soil. But the most important thing, and that's why you can see the spade laid across the screen there, is to make sure that you do plant at the right depth. So that graft union, that knobbly bit, is actually out of the soil. Particularly with apples that are being grown on a specific rootstock, and indeed some of the stone fruit on the new modern dwarfing rootstocks. If you let the scion, the top, the variety, root into the ground, then all the work that's gone into breeding rootstocks to control the growth is going to be lost. It is important when you come to plant it, you plant it, as I say, at the correct depth, that it is really well firmed in. And if you have been doing any planting during this last winter, given how dry the soil is, as the plants come into leaf, get down there with a couple of buckets full of water, and it's no use just sort of spraying a bit over the surface. It really is absolutely soaking it. And we've got a couple of new trees in our little mini orchard, and I was down there and they got 2 big watering cans full each yesterday. The other important thing, of course, is to make sure that it is correctly tied, and there's some good plastic ties available or canvas ties available, but do make sure that there's a spacer between the stake and the tree to make sure that the tree isn't going to rub against it. If it's being newly planted and it's got quite a root ball, then you can put the stake in at an angle like that, and that should be facing the prevailing wind, so the wind blows the tree onto the stake and holds it in place. And for a lot of your modern fruit trees on dwarfing rootstocks, they are going to need staking throughout their life, not just for the first year or two until we got established. The other thing you may need to worry about is if you've got rabbits in the area. Our local fox does keeps the rabbits down reasonably well, but out of my bedroom window here, I do sometimes see the rabbits running around. So if you're planting new stock, they will be quite a few pounds. You don't want it to get chewed up one night just by a rabbit having a nibble at it. So you can get these spiral plastic guards that will expand as the tree expands. As far as the annual routine is concerned, and it doesn't matter whether it's bush fruit, cane fruit, top fruit, you do need to get the feed on early, and the feed that I like is Vitex Q4. If you're organic, you're not going to be using this because it is a sort of a manufactured fertilizer. But the advantage of Vitex Q4 is that it's not just got the nitrogen, the phosphate and the potash, it also has all the micro elements, so it's really good for fruit. A lot of the fruit do tend to suffer from deficiency diseases. A really good mulch is called for, and for me it is garden compost, and it's about 2 inches, about 5 centimeters deep. Do be careful not to actually put it right actually around the trunk of a tree, so it's mounded up, and I usually cover around about a meter diameter, and that does really well. Do keep that area free of weeds right through the season, hoeing it regularly but very shallowly, because you will have surface feeding roots near the surface, but you want to keep that free of weeds so you don't have competition for food and water. When it comes to watering, it is important that you give things a really good soaking. If you're using an oscillating sprinkler because you've got maybe raspberries, bush fruit, then it pays to use a sprinkler. But when you water, you do need to put on an inch of water. Sorry, couldn't find a rain gauge in inches, so this one's a metric one. That's 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch of water. How do you know if you put an inch of water? You get a baked bean tin, a Heinz baked bean tin. Other varieties are available. You empty the beans out first. Put the can into the area where the sprinkler is sprinkling. Once there's an inch of water in your empty bean can, you know you've put on sufficient water to have watered or wet down something like 9 or 10 inches. Just damping the surface is going to cause a lot of problems because it is just going to bring the roots up towards the surface. And if you're growing things in pots, then this sort of spaghetti irrigation system does work really well. And I certainly use this in my greenhouse for watering the tomatoes. Pruning we'll come back to in a little more detail a little bit later, but that's all part of the annual routine. Pest and disease control, it depends what you're doing and how organic you wish to be. There are some very good organic sprays based on rapeseed oil or fish oil that will help control some of the pests and diseases. Some of the fungus fighters are not organic. I really, apart from maybe a little bit of fungus spray on gooseberry for gooseberry mildew, that's really all I do use. The apple trees, yes, they do get some mildew. Yes, I do get some scab on the apples. Yes, I do get some pear rust on the pear tree, but I can live with that rather than actually use chemicals. So, but you're in control. You decide what you need to use. Lots of different pests. If you've got something like woolly aphid on your apples, it can get quite bad. Just mix up some washing up liquid in a pressure sprayer and give a really good blast. If you've got something horrible like vine weevil in your strawberries, then I do use a biological control for vine weevil. And there are various things that you can use, like the codling moth trap, to help reduce pest problems. As far as mildew is concerned, there are sprays that you can use. Basically, though, if you've got good ventilation and good aeration, and you're careful with your strawberries outside or inside, picking off any damaged fruit, then you don't need to actually do any spraying. Yes, I do get some scab, perhaps not quite as bad as that one. Yes, I do get some brown rot, and yes, I do get some pear rust, but I can live with that. They're not going to do that much damage to reduce the trees, and you're going to get still plenty of good, healthy fruit. Bird damage can be quite a problem. If you've got cane fruit and bush fruit, a nice fruit cage works well. This is my blueberry. It's not in a fruit cage, but you can possibly just see that once those fruits start ripening, it is just covered over with a little bit of bird netting. The Blueberry, I do grow in a pot because it wants to be in acid soil. You can't quite see there, but underneath that picture, underneath that pot, there is a saucer. The saucer goes on, well, actually, it went under it last weekend and will stay under it right through till leaf fall in September. And that just means that when I water, any water that drains through will sort of carry on by capillary action, keeping that compost moist right through the day. If they dry out, you can get a lot of fruit drop, so you don't want that. So netting for bird damage. And this, and I say this is my cherry tree. A traditional cherry tree, well, 20 foot high, 20 foot across, no way could you net it. But this one is on the dwarfing pixie rootstock, and it stands maybe 6-8 foot tall. And just before the fruit starts to ripen, I do just drape a net right over it. So dwarfing rootstocks means that you can keep the birds off using netting. Okay, let's get on to pruning. Clearly, the important thing is that you get the cut right, and it's always to a downward and outward pointing bud. You don't want to be too close, or as the cut dries out, the bud will dry out. You don't want to be too far away, or otherwise this bit that you haven't trimmed will die off, and as it dies off, it will often dry back, and the bud will rot away. So it's a sloping cut up behind the bud, and using a decent pair of secateurs. These are Felco secateurs. They are quite expensive. I think they'll probably cost you 50 or 60 pounds now. These, we have 2 pairs of these. My wife and I both had these at college, and that was over 50 years ago, and still going strong. And the big advantage of the Felco secateurs is that you can quite quickly take them apart, get the blade out, sharpen the blade, because having a good sharp pair of secateurs really very important. And every sort of 5 to 10 years, I've worn the blade down so much I have to go and buy a new blade. But a good pair of secateurs really is useful. Winter v summer pruning. The winter pruning for most of your fruit is what is going to be required, but summer pruning for stone fruit, if you winter prune your plums, your damsons, then you do stand a very good chance of getting a silver leaf disease come in, so you only prune those in the summer. In actual fact, we've got a rather large damson. It's part of an old Worcestershire hedge, and one bit that I retain in our garden. So it's not on a dwarfing rootstock. It probably gets some 20 foot tall, maybe even a little bit taller than that. And I leave pruning till the fruit is ripe, which is sort of the end of August, very early September. And then with a chainsaw, I take 2 or 3 of the tall branches out, lower them down onto the lawn, and that makes picking very much easier when you haven't got to climb the tree, the fruit is brought down to you. Your trained fruit, if you're growing it as fan trained or horizontal espalier trained or cordon trained, your trained fruit is going to need not just winter pruning, but also some summer pruning as well. What you're looking for as far as sort of top fruit is concerned, I don't know if you can see on, let me go, there are stop screen share. So what you're looking for is to encourage these side spurs to build up. So shorten the growth that was produced last year to a downward and outward pointing bud, and that's the amount of growth that was produced last year. You can just about see the joint there. So about 1/3 of it off. If there's any side branches like these, then just shorten those back to 1 inch or 2, because this is what you want to encourage. Nice healthy spurs all the way along. Okay, so your pruning is to encourage spur production on your top fruit. When it comes to mature trees, and in the garden here we've got two very well, probably over mature apple trees. One's a Bramley and the other's a Norfolk Beefing. They were here when we moved in 30 odd years ago. They were the only things that the goat hadn't eaten in the garden. And with a tree like that is really mature, it is simply a case of sawing out some of the branches in the winter to keep the growth something like acceptable. And you can use a good pruning bow saw such as this, and for smaller branches, one of these, hopefully you can see the picture in the top corner, a pruning saw. This has a sort of a lug here because most of your pruning is going to be done on the downward stroke, and that grip at the bottom of the saw there, hopefully you can see that, means that you can get a good pull cut on the backward downward stroke. And those couple of decent saws will help you prune your mature trees. Now, looking at top fruit, there are various forms of pruning required. Traditionally, we have grown a lot of bush fruit, where you've got probably 1 foot to 18 inches. So that's up to sort of 45 centimeters of trunk before the lower branches. And you've taken the center out. So what you're trying to produce is a very open bush, a goblet shape. And the reason for that is you want the sun and the air to blow through your tree so that you get the wood ripen, and it's far less susceptible to problems. And because it's got good ventilation right through the summer, far less susceptible to mildews and rusts. So that's your traditional bush fruit. If you look at modern orchards, quite often they are pyramid or spindle trees, and that's where the center leader has been allowed to grow up. The lower branches are allowed to come out a little bit further than the higher branches, and basically as the sun goes round, it ripens the growth. So these will all be on dwarfing rootstocks, and sometimes with a modern orchard, instead of it being a three-dimensional cone or pyramid, it's a flat cone, so actually grown so tractors can go down and do the pruning, and it's just left as sort of almost like a hedge. Cordons used to be very popular on a dwarfing rootstock, where you grow the main branch, a single main branch at 45 degrees. That slowed down the flow of sap, and you end up with lots of nice little spurs all the way along the length. Cordons are much less popular now because breeders have produced these pillar trees, where it's a single upright trunk with very short spurs on, and this isn't Photoshop, this is how it will look. Your pillar trees, maybe 8 foot tall, short spurs all the way along the length of a trunk, and you really do get an excellent fruit crop, and that saves all this growing at 45 degrees. If you're growing apples and pears, then if you've got fences or walls, you can grow as horizontal espaliers. Apples and pears, it is a permanent branch framework. You'll sometimes see a pear tree growing on the gable end of a cottage that may be sort of 60 or 100 years old. So it's very old. The main trunk goes up the middle, side branches come along, and off each of those side branches there's a whole range of spurs. So that's apples and pears. For your stone fruit, your peaches, damsons, apricots, cherries, whatever, those are grown as a fan, not a horizontal espalier, because they work on renewal principle. So if one of the branches gets too old and grey, basically, you simply cut out that branch and train in a new one. So it's a renewal system for a fan train tree. And with the stone fruit, you will be doing that renewal pruning during the summer or at harvest time, but not in the winter. Oh, and of course, step over trees. I can't really alter. Sorry, just go back one. I don't know whether you've got the all the controls at the bottom there, slightly hiding my picture, but hopefully you can see the step over tree. It's just one long branch with a trunk in the middle. So step over trees do work very nicely in confined spaces. When it comes to pruning of bush fruit, then there are specific things that you need to do. Gooseberries and red currants are winter pruned to a branch framework of spurs. So a bit like a sort of shrunk down version of that apple that we looked at earlier. So there's a nice open branch framework, and then all the side shoots off those main branches are trimmed back to about 1 inch during the winter, and that you'll get the fruiting on those little short spurs off the main branch framework. Black currants are quite different. With a black currant, you will see that the older stems are quite dark. Hopefully you can see my picture in the top corner.
Philip, do you want to stop the screen sharing so you appear bigger?
Can you see that? Sorry, Indy, is that showing up on your picture?
Not particularly big. If you stop your screen
okay,
sharing,
I'll stop the share.
Yeah, then everybody can see.
Okay, so there you can see the main branch is quite dark, so you can tell which is the older part. And the young ones that you leave are much paler, and that's the ones that are going to produce the fruit. And you can do your blackcurrant pruning when harvesting. There you go. That makes life nice and easy. You can harvest your blackcurrants bent double over your bush fruit with a bucket, or you can sit basically on the bench with, you can probably see the blackcurrants on there, having cut out all the fruiting wood, leaving all the young growth behind. Sit there with a nice glass of white wine and pick the fruit into the bowl. So save yourself some time and effort. Blueberries, minimal pruning. There are some quite dwarf ones. This particular one is called Patriot, and I suppose out of a tub it stands 3'6", 4 foot tall, and it just needs a little bit of just before it came into leaf. I just went over it. There are a few little dead bits here and there. During the summer, you get some quite strong growths come on, and I just shorten those back, leave the fruit exposed as it ripens. And unlike sort of black currants that you sort of maybe pick all at once, or the gooseberries that you pick all at once, the blueberries do crop over quite a long period. And as soon as they start ripening, I suppose 2 or 3 times a week, we just go over it and pick a sort of small bowlful. We open freeze them in the freezer, just on a tray in the freezer, and then right through the autumn, winter. I think we've probably run out now. It's a sort of a sprinkle of blueberries on top of whatever other fruit we're having. So ongoing harvest. Summer fruiting raspberries, you prune after harvest, and you cut out all the fruited canes. Your autumn fruiting raspberries, you cut right to ground level in February or March. And of course, at this time of year, you should be seeing some quite vigorous growth coming up from the base. And I really was getting a little bit worried. The fruit garden is very dry. So last week I did put the oscillating sprinkler on it for it was probably about 3/4 of an hour to get the inch of water onto it to give them a really good soaking, and that has made a big difference to how they're looking now.
Philip, do you ever leave any of the autumn canes to give you an earlier crop? I tend to leave half of the canes up.
No, because I got the summer fruiting raspberries in one row and the autumn fruiting next door, I keep them separate. So the autumn fruiting now I cut right down to ground level, and they won't start fruiting till the summer fruiting ones have finished. And then they will carry on. I mean, I have picked the autumn fruiting ones as late as the beginning of November. The other thing I find the advantage of the autumn fruiting ones, because they ripen slowly, you get very good flavour, and because when they're ripening, there's so much other fruit around in the hedgerows around here that the birds are much less keen. So while I have to net the summer fruiting ones, the autumn fruiting ones I don't usually bother netting at all. Loganberries are a little bit different because they require pruning to alternate sides. So at the moment, this is what the Loganberry looks like with all the shoots trained out. And by the summer, the trained out fruits will be ready for picking, and all the new shoots that are coming up at the side will basically just be tied into a couple of canes. And the reason for keeping the new shoots away from the fruited ones on the left hand side is to stop any cane blight from the mature canes going on to the new canes. For the winter, these are just bundled together, and then round about the end of February time, they all get spaced out onto their wires. So it looks a little bit strange that it goes one way one year and the other way the next year, but that way it just helps control disease. Blackberries autumn prune to remove old canes and tie in the new growth. If you want to win prize at the local show, you're going to Himalayan Giant is the blackberry to grow. The only trouble is when it comes to pruning, you do need that suit of armour. It is pretty vigorous. Okay, I think we're doing all right on. Oh yes, that's lovely. Hopefully we can have a look through at some of the different cultivars for fruit, and pollinators usually aren't too much of a problem in a village setting, because when your apples are in flower, other apples will be flowering at the same time. And not just apples, but the ornamental crab apples, which will pollinate your fruiting apples quite nicely. You'll often see in orchards that at the ends of each row, they will put in an ornamental malus in order to provide a little bit of extra pollen for the apples. So let's have a look at a few of my favourites. Now, Cox's Orange Pippin may be one of the best known, and maybe one of the ones that tastes really good, but it is really quite difficult to grow. If there's a pest or disease around, Cox's Orange Pippin is going to suffer from it. So, Christmas Pippin, we bought one of these. It's one of the newer Cox varieties, and it's absolutely superb. I don't know why they call it Christmas Pippin, because we were eating that until certainly the end of March. It did really well. Discovery is one of the, well, it is the earliest apple to ripen. Quite small. It doesn't store at all, so you sort of pick it. You tend to get rather too many of them, and then you've just got to give them all away because you can't store them. Oh, sorry. James Grieve is one that is really good flavour, nice and juicy, and it's a nice, easy one to grow. We did have quite a sizable Egremont russet, but we needed to alter a pathway, and I decided it had to go. And apart from anything else, we would produce probably, oh, I don't know, 50, 60 pounds of fruit off one bush Egremont russet. And while I like an occasional Egremont russet because it's got a distinct nutty flavour and that sort of russety skin, so sort of 2 or 3 were fine. 2 or 3 sackfuls was just too much. So that's gone. Braeburn is another newer cultivar, and one you'll often see in the supermarkets. And then Fiesta, it's another one of the Cox varieties that's nice. Now, I'm not sure whether you can see at the bottom, but because these screens normally don't have all the zoom information on the bottom, but Bramley seedling is certainly the best cooker. It wasn't Mr. Bramley who sowed the seed of Bramley seedling. It was a young girl who planted a apple pip, and this tree grew up and was growing rather nicely when she and her parents moved and sold their cottage to Mr. Bramley. Mr. Bramley saw the how good the Bramley seedling was, and he sold the wood to a commercial apple grower and said, you can have some of this graft wood provided it takes my name. So that's how it ended up with the name Bramley seedling. And any Bramley seedling anywhere in the world do originate from the one tree that is still surviving up north somewhere. I can't quite remember where. So the reason Bramley seedlings fruits are so large is because it's a triploid, and that means that each cell has 3 sets of genes, not the normal 2. But because it's got 3 sets of genes, it doesn't produce any useful pollen at all. So it does need other trees around to pollinate it. And we, as I say, we've got a Norfolk beeting and a Bramley seedling, but we've got some other flowering malus around. So basically the flowering malus fertilize the Norfolk beefing, because the Bramley sits there, takes the pollen from everything else, produces a bumper crop. It does have the habit of being biennial, and last year was an off year and it only produced probably about 1 barrel load of apples. The year before was an on year where I think it probably produced about 4 or 5 barrow loads of apples. We have something in the village called Incredible Edible, and they've got various raised beds down in the village square and the car park and everywhere. So if you do end up with a surplus like we do with Bramleys on an on year, I just take crates down and just pop them down beside the Incredible Edible growing boxes, and people can just help themselves. Okay, moving on then to pears, usually grafted onto, I think I'm answering a certain question from earlier. Okay, usually grafted onto a quince rootstock, which is semi-dwarfing. Conference is the one that has probably been around for longest. It's partially self-fertile, juicy but firm, and stores quite well. Though having said that, if you look to the bottom of my list there, Concord, it's a newer cultivar. It's got really good flavour, and I think keeps a little bit better than Conference. For really good flavour, you do have William Bon Chrétien and Douane de Comice, both of which you pick them just before they're ripe. With an apple, you pick them as they ripen, but you pick pears just before they ripe, and you lay them out in trays, and you check them on a weekly basis. And whilst Conference and Concord will store and ripen over a period of time, you'll find both with Williams and Comice, they're not quite ripe, they're not quite ripe, they are all ripe. And you end up with a tray full of 50, 60 apples, all ripe together. And okay, you can bottle them or do something with them or give them away. So they just do not store very well at all.
You mentioned the Douane de Comice was difficult to grow. What's difficult about it?
A bit like Cox, it tends to get everything that's going as far as problems are concerned. If it gets too wet, too dry, too hungry, and it's subject to disease. So yeah,
Mm.
it's quite a problem.
Okay.
Plums and Damsons used to be on St. Julian, but there is now this lovely dwarfing rootstock, which is much more suitable for general garden growing. I'm smiling slightly because the top of my list is Victoria, and Victoria is far and away the best eating plum that is going. My brother had a large Victoria plum, and it just got so large, and it tends to overcrop so that branches actually sort of break out of it. In any case, they got rid of it, and back in the autumn he said, I want a new Victoria. I said, well, do make sure that you buy one on Pixie, the dwarfing rootstock. Well, I'm told they have just bought one. I asked what rootstock it was on. He said, I don't know. So they could end up in a few years' time back where they started if they didn't actually check the rootstock. Being a Worcestershire person and having trained at Worcester, Pershore yellow egg, it kept this country going through the Second World War, the sort of fruit harvest from the Vale of Evesham, both into Birmingham and down to London, and made several million pots of jam. And Pershore yellow egg, if you want to make a plum pie or jam, it just is incredibly good. I'm biased. Okay, Marjorie seedling, if you want one of the purple skinned ones. And then you've got these newer varieties, Herman and Stella, which on a Pixie rootstock work really well in a small space. So if you've only got room on the patio for a smallish tree, one of those. Okay, Merryweather is a classic damson, but it does get very large, probably as large as my wild damson in our garden, a sort of Worcestershire hedgerow damson. But there's a new one called Shropshire, and on Pixie, it makes a really nice, manageable tree, so ideal for a smaller garden. By the way, you don't need to be making notes of all these varieties because the list will be available from Indy at the end. Okay, let's look at sort of peaches, apricots, nectarines, the sort of a stone fruit. A lot of these have now been bred for growing in a smaller situation, possibly even in pots or containers. So Peregrine is your standard old-fashioned peach, but Terrace Diamond and Garden Lady are both dwarf types. Peach leaf curl can be quite a problem, and if you've got it as a dwarf plant in a sort of small pot, so long as you don't let it dry out in the summer, then if you see any signs of peach leaf curl on peaches, apricots or nectarines, you can just pick off those leaves, so you don't need to worry. In apricots, Aprigold is one of the new dwarf apricots. I mean, for nectarines, Terrace Ruby. I mean, Lord Napier makes quite a sizable tree, but Terrace Ruby, if you shorter space, that works really well. Excuse me while I have a glug of water. Okay. Actually, I think my my cherry tree is probably on Gisela 5. It could be on Colt, but and in fact, when I bought it, I was told it was on Colt, but it's only getting to 7 or 8 foot tall, so I suspect it's on the really dwarfing rootstock. And this is why it is so important that you plant at the right depth and don't let the variety root down into the ground. Stella is self-fertile, so you don't need other cherries around. I said right back at the beginning that your fruit do need to be grown in full sunshine. But the exception, and there always is an exception in horticulture, is Morello Cherry. You can grow that fan trained on a north wall. So where you've got a north wall and can't grow anything else, grow a Morello Cherry, because it's certainly it's acidic. It's not one you want to sort of go and pick off the bush. Though that said, if I forget to net my Morello, which is again trained against the fence, if I forget to net it, the blackbirds don't seem to mind, but it's quite acidic. But it's really got a super flavour for tarts and jams. Looking at fig trees, the one you'll nearly always find in my garden centre is brown turkey. Now that's fine if you've got a 20-foot high wall and a 20-foot wide wall and that much space to grow it on, that's fine, but it really just gets, it's vigorous. I suspect it's what my daughter had on the side of her French farmhouse that they lived in for a while, because it was covered with the height of the building and everything else besides. The one I grow is Petit Nigra, and this one gets to, I suppose it's probably about 8-10 foot tall. Cut out some of the, and I grow it as a bush. I used to have it in a pot, but it just takes too much watering during the summer, so now I do grow it freestanding, and try and cut out some of the older growths from the centre. The thing you need to remember with figs is don't leave those little figs on in the winter. So all those that were about the size of the end of your thumb all had to be broken off, and anything larger than the size of a pea needed to be broken off, because fig fruit, it's basically inside out. If you cut to the middle, you'll find all the flower bits are on the inside, and it tries to produce two crops, which it can't do in our climate. So basically you want, if you're looking at your fig tree now, the little figs will be starting to swell. Mine are petit pois. They're not yet the size of full-size peas, but they're beginning to swell quite nicely, and those are the ones that will swell, and given a half-decent summer, will be absolutely wonderful in August and September. And there's nothing like picking a hot fig tree off your own fig. When it comes to walnuts, then you really are planting for your well, not even your children, your grandchildren. We did have a local farm shop with a very large, rather sick walnut tree, which unfortunately they did remove last winter. It got just too bad. But we had collected some walnuts from underneath it, and you plant them, leave them outside, leave them for a couple of years to actually start sprouting. But the trees now, 2 trees, and they're about 2 foot tall, and we will find somewhere to plant them. And as I say, it's something that will be cropping in about 30 years time. So a long wait for a walnut.
Philip, that fig you mentioned, the Petit Nigra, is that as hardy? Is that as hardy as the brown turkey in the UK?
Oh yes, yeah. Mine just sort of sits there. It's freestanding, but there is a fence behind it to the north, so it does get a little bit of protection from the north wind. But no, tough as old boots, no problem at all. Moving on then to raspberries. Again, there's some really nice new varieties. Most of the raspberries have been bred in Scotland, and the reason they're bred in Scotland is too damn windy up there for any green fly to fly around and spread virus diseases. So you'll quite often find that the raspberry names are sort of Glen Ample or something like that. For autumn bliss, I do like the autumn fruiting ones. I'm afraid I don't like autumn gold. To me, a raspberry needs to be raspberry coloured and not gold. It's like golden beetroot. Well, they're totally wrong, or red sprouts, totally wrong, because you do eat with your eyes. So autumn bliss, which is a traditional coloured autumn fruiting raspberry. If you're really short of space, then you've got this new one, Ruby Beauty, and you could actually grow that in a tub because it only gets about 3 foot tall, just over 3 foot, maybe a metre tall, and you can get 3 or 4 canes in a 18-inch tub. So long as you don't let it dry out, it will do fine.
I was just going to say, Philip, I went to the Paris Flower Show last year and I bought a purple raspberry, an orange raspberry, and a yellow raspberry.
Yes, you had an autumn show. How did you manage to do that?
I know this was 2 years ago at Paris.
Ah, 2 years ago. Okay, that's all right then. Blackberries. This Caraca Black is absolutely superb. You get, if you want to win at your local flower show, this is as good as Himalayan Giant. It's about the size of the end of your thumb. So it's a really large fruit. It's very sweet. The canes are quite manageable. I got it growing on a sort of fence at the side of our mini orchard, and when I'm mowing the orchard during the summer months, it's great because I can just sort of harvest it as I walk along, pushing a mower and harvesting the blackberries. But quite a lot do end up in the freezer and get made into apple and blackberry pie during the winter months, autumn winter months. There is this new thornless one. I've not grown it myself. I've tried previous thornless blackberries, and basically they've not been a very good crop. I'm told this one is one of the new cultivars and it does produce a really good crop. There are quite a lot of hybrid berries available, and certainly my favorite is loganberry. Again, it's not a fruit that you can sort of munch off straight off the canes, but it does make really, really nice tarts. Okay, noting the time, we've just gone past the 8:30, but only a couple more slides and then we'll have time for a few questions, hopefully. Blackcurrants, again, tend to be bred in Scotland, so you end up with these Ben Conan, Ben Hope. Ben Conan, it's a little bit more compact. Baldwin, which was the sort of traditional one when I was training, would get, oh, I don't know, 5 foot tall in a season. So Ben Conan's a little more compact than that. Ben Hope is a new cultivar, and it's resistant to big bud. Big bud is a mite that gets into the buds, and you look at your blackcurrants and think, oh, they've got whopping great buds. I'm going to get a super crop this year. No, you're not. The bud's been infected by big bud mite and made them horrible. Red currants, I have no idea what my variety of red currant is. All I know is it produces far more than I could possibly use. The birds do have most of our red currants. We freeze a couple of pounds worth and that's sufficient. So that's just from one red currant bush. This is one of the new Dutch cultivars. White currants, they'll say it's been around for a long time, but it takes a lot of beating. Gooseberries, my main gooseberry bush is actually Careless, which we've had for donkey's years, and I hate to throw it out. It's very sort of lax and spready and not easy, but I have planted this last autumn. Oh, sorry. Go back. Hinamaki, which is one of the new Japanese varieties, which I think will stay neater, and it's a rather nice dessert cultivar, and it's supposed to be mildew resistant, but I don't know yet because I only just planted it. Blueberries, mine is Patriot. Blue crop, there are quite a lot to choose from. Remember, they do need an acid compost and are best grown in a pot, but make sure that it doesn't dry out during the summer months. Quickly then on to grapes. My Black Hamburg I do grow in a cold greenhouse, so it's planted outside, and the cane is trained through, and we do get in just a standard 6 by 8 foot greenhouse, so the cane is along the ridge and it's only 8 foot long, but we do get, I don't know, a dozen, maybe 15 large clumps of grapes. So, very worthwhile. Phoenix is one of the newer outdoor ones. I've got an ordinary green outdoor one growing behind my compost heap now. It used to be trained into a bigger, older greenhouse, but when that fell down, I just trained it against the fence. And in a good season, we will get maybe sort of 3 buckets full of grapes off it. I don't make wine anymore. I used to, but basically we just squeeze it and have it as grape juice now. And very nice it is too. Strawberries, very quickly, I really do like Albion. I grow them in pots. Right at the beginning, you might have seen that picture. So they're grown in 6-inch pots in the greenhouse on upturned 6-inch pots. And the reason I grow them in the greenhouse is I'm fed up with the blackbirds and the squirrels and every other beast pinching them. So they're grown in a greenhouse on the staging. So there's tomatoes on one side of the greenhouse and potted strawberries the other side. Albion I love, it's perpetual. The fruit is already swelling, and where are we? We're coming up to the beginning of May. It's about 2 weeks time, maybe 3, depending on what the May's like. We will start picking Albion. We've also got flamenco in there, Hapill, Honey Eye, quite a few different varieties that take us through the bulk of the picking season. But then come the autumn, Albion will still be picking a few Albion right through to the end of October. So really worthwhile. Rhubarb, I can't. Yep.
How long do you keep your strawberry plants for? Do you throw them away after 3 years, or
about 3 years? So I take some fresh runners each year, which start off in 3.5-inch pots. Then they go into 5.5-inch dwarf pots, then into their 6-inch pot. And I do fruit them in their first year, fruit them for a second year. Some make it to a third year, but quite a lot get thrown out after just 2 years of cropping. In other words, their first year having been a runner, and certainly the second year, but and some make it through to the third year, but if they're looking a bit ropey, I just throw them out then. But they're so easy to propagate, you get more than enough runners off them. I do also grow the white one because my wife likes them, but they don't look like strawberries. She says they're wonderful flavour, but well, there you go. And rhubarb, I can't believe, what was it? There were sort of 4 sticks bound together in the market, and I think it was about £1.50 for 4 sticks of rhubarb. I really couldn't believe it. We grow 2 varieties, Victoria, which is a very traditional one, which we do not force, and we pick bunches off that and give it to all our friends during the season. That's quite a big clump. Timperley Early grows in a separate spot beside the compost heap, and that is the one that we do force. Now, never mind your little terracotta forcing pot with a little sort of lid on it. It started off with something like that. It then went to one of the old galvanized dustbins, but then that wasn't big enough. And what we have is a spare composter, and that goes on it soon after Christmas and stays on it. As I lifted and divided and replanted this year, I only did a single pick, and it was probably about 20 stems, certainly a good few kilos, and it's so sweet and it's so tender and pink. So we do force that, and a lot of that goes into the freezer.
How long can you do the forcing for? How many weeks can you keep cropping it for?
I crop it basically for 2 or 3 weeks, but once you get to basically into April, that's when the cover comes off and it's allowed to grow, and it doesn't get picked at all during the summer. So I don't pick any of it as summer rhubarb. I pick it basically as forced rhubarb only, and then we moved to the Victoria. So now we're on the Victoria, and the Timperley Early is growing away, building up its root stock, ready for next year. It is beside the compost heap, so any sort of drainage from a compost heap does, because the compost heap is about 6 foot square, any drainage from that does feed it, and that's why it had got into a very large clump, and I decided last winter to lift it and divide it. So happy fruit going. I did manage to get through everything, I think, just about. So we will stop the share. And have you managed to, Indy, collect any questions as we've gone along, or do we ask the questions now?
Yeah, Philip, we've got a whole ton of questions actually. So
okay, fire away.
I think we're going to be here for a while.
Okay.
So I'm going to start off right at the beginning then. So somebody was asking if they don't see many bees around, is it a good idea, or is it just a waste of time to try and pollinate by hand using a small paintbrush?
The only thing, and I must say I didn't get round to it this year, is the almond that I do when I get round to it. I do that with a nice sort of camel hair brush. But no, I've found that even the strawberries in the greenhouse I go in, and there are bees are buzzing. We do encourage bees. We do have sort of, the bee hotels, the classic sort of cut stems to look after the individual bees. I think the old vicar used to keep bees, because we often had honeybees coming into the garden. He's moved on, but we do still seem to get honeybees coming. And there's certainly been plenty of bumblebees about. We do sow beside the raised vegetable beds a bee and butterfly mixture, which looks rather like the mixture behind your head, and it does certainly feed them up during the summer months. So no hand pollinating apart from the almond, which I didn't get round to doing this year. No, I think you do everything you can to encourage the bees into your garden.
Okay. And do you treat tayberries the same as loganberries?
I've not grown tayberries, but I suspect they would suffer from cane spot the same as loganberries. So yes, I think I would. But as I say, I've not grown them myself, but yes, try it and see how it works.
Okay. And somebody's looking at Bramley 20 as a garden tree on an M27, as they can't get it on an M26. They're happy to prune, but they want a bush or a pyramid at 7 foot eventually. Will it be too slow growing?
No, I think given reasonable fertility to the soil, so they're not sort of on horrible sandy soil, yeah, I think they should be all right with that.
Yeah. Okay. And how long does it take for a fig to get really big? That this person's is 5 foot after 6 years.
Only 5 foot after 6
Yeah.
years. Okay. That doesn't sound like brown turkey. I mean, I would expect a brown turkey after 6 years to be about 15 foot tall or something like that.
Wow.
It's either it's not brown turkey, or it's rather sort of poor growing conditions. I've taken cuttings off hardwood. My dwarf fig, you can take hardwood cuttings, so any bits you prune out, I take as hardwood cuttings, and they have rooted really well. So ones that were rooted last winter are now 18 inches 2 foot tall, and this is one of the dwarf ones. And I did actually notice that there are a couple of little knobbles on it, as if it's going to try and produce a couple of figs. I won't let it, but certainly I would expect it to put on 2 to 3 foot of growth. And brown turkey, I mean, that can put on 4, 5, maybe even 6 foot of growth in a year in good growing conditions. So I worry that either the growing conditions aren't suitable, or or perhaps it, no, we'll be positive. He's bought himself not a brown turkey, it's a nice dwarf variety.
Well, they've just come back with another message saying it's definitely brown turkey and they have restricted the roots. But I know certainly I've bought things from places and they've been mislabeled, and then it's only once they've, it's flowered or it's come to, a decent size, I've realized it's completely the wrong plant.
Yeah,
It does happen
okay.
occasionally.
Yes, I mean, it is a good idea to, they always reckon you grew it in a load of brick rubble with some paving slabs around it to make a box to restrict the root growing. So perhaps he's done a little bit too good a job on restricting, or they've done too good a job on restricting the roots.
Do you fertilize? 'Cause I've heard some people say not to fertilize figs. Do you fertilize it? And I've also heard somebody say you can put plenty of potash on at this time of the season.
I do put a good mulch over a good garden compost, and yes, they do get a sprinkle of Vitex Q4 usually around about end of February time.
End of February, okay. And is there any specific retailers that you would recommend, nurseries? So if somebody is looking for a particular fruit tree on a particular rootstock, is there any supplies that you would recommend?
I haven't got the list out of the file.
Pomona fruits.
Pardon?
Pomona fruits.
Pomona, thank you. But yes, Pomona fruits. I'm sure they are available online. Some of the garden centres do carry very good good range. In sort of Worcestershire, it's Matthews are the big fruit growers, and you will see they're pretty good at labelling up not just what the variety it is, but also what the rootstock is, and it is important that you look at the rootstock. And particularly you're buying a cherry, and you don't want to buy one on its own roots. It's going to grow incredibly large.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Someone commented that they think you can actually get grafted walnuts now, which crop within 3 years.
Yes, you probably can. I haven't come across those. I'm very happy we haven't collected the walnut seeds, and happy to see my grandchildren benefit. I shall look that one up. I've not come across that. I'll look that up.
Okay, great. Someone was saying, why would you grow blackberries when you can pick them from the hedgerows for free?
I used to say that myself, certainly, and we've got sort of a bit of a paddock here, and there are very good blackberries there, and we always used to go and pick the blackberries off our hedges. Picking blackberries off roadside hedges with all the pollutants on them, well, I'm perhaps not quite so sure about that, but yes, if you can find a sort of a nice field away from the roads, then yes, why not? And it's great fun going blackberrying. We all did it as children, but then I came across this variety that produces these wonderfully large sweet fruits, and instead of getting tangled in the hedge, you can go along with certainly a sort of a pudding basin, and you can fill that in 20 minutes and put them straight in the freezer, and if you want to, you can go and win prizes at the local flower show as well. So yes, no, blackberrying, yes, kids should be encouraged to go blackberrying, but not alongside main roads, please.
How many blueberries do you need for a summer crop? Do you need different ones for fertilization?
No, I've only got the one Patriot. It seems to fertilize, be sort of self-fertile. It's a job to know what we get off that one bush in weight, because you pick sort of a fruit bowl 2 or 3 times a week during the season, so we probably end up with probably a couple of kilos off that one bush. So it made it pretty productive. You do realize that most of the blueberries are grown in the States, and they don't pick them. They're grown in sort of special fields, which they are able to flood from a river. So when the fruit is ripe, they flood the field. All the blueberries float to the surface. They all get blown to one side and sucked off, and then they drain the field down. It's cheating, I think.
Fascinating. I think you might have touched on this earlier. Does brown turkey need to have restricted roots?
Yeah, if you're growing brown turkey, yes, yeah, do restrict the roots. That will try and keep it down to a manageable size. 3x2 concrete paving slabs, and you can make sort of a box that's sort of 3 foot square. And that's the sort of size that you need. I mean, you know, they recommend plenty of rubble in the base of that hole. Again, try and slow it down and try and get more production. I don't know on our Petit Nigra, which is, say, probably about 8 foot tall, maybe 9 foot. And how many fruits do we get off it? Probably 30 or 40 fruits off it. And there's just nothing like going and grabbing a hot fig on a hot summer's day.
What I do with my fig is, because it's quite a pain to dig in all the slabs into the ground, it's quite, you know, back-breaking work. So I actually planted it into a 30-litre pot and sunk the pot into the ground, which seemed to work quite well for me.
Well, ours was certainly in a pot to start with. And probably a bit bigger than 30 litres. It was probably about, 2'6". Yeah, probably about 2'6" diameter pot, but it just took too much watering. So I suppose what I could have done is actually I could have just cut the bottom off and sunk that into the ground, and that would have provided very restricted root growth. But even then, you've still got to add water if we get really dry weather.
I think we've got somebody who's showing off here at the moment. They're saying they've got a very large pear tree, a Nouveau Poitou, I think I probably said that wrong, which is at least 150 years old, and they've had over 1,000 pears on it last year, which they gave away and froze for pies.
I mean, pears, you know, particularly if they're grown as espaliers against a sort of a wall to give them protection, they can live for donkey's years. I mean, our Bramley apple tree, it's enormous. It's not. It predates dwarfing rootstocks. The house is sort of 1901, and I think the Bramley apple tree is probably about 1902. And when it has an on year, I mean, it's by the barrel load. It really is. So well done to that pear growing. Splendid.
Someone has a Haganta plum on a wavid rootstock. Do you know
what?
A Haganta plum on a wavid rootstock? I've never heard of a wavid rootstock.
I've never heard of that plum either.
That's me. That's me. And the wavid rootstock is European, and the Haganta plum is bred in Germany.
Is it?
Yes.
No, that's new to me, Kate. I'm ever so sorry. It's a foreigner. That's what the trouble is.
I found the plum. I bought the plums at Marks and Spencer's 2 years ago, and they were grown in Kent. And I made a note of the name of the plum, and I bought a tree. I ordered one and bought one, and it came on wavid rootstock, and I had no idea what it was at all.
No, well, that's certainly new on me, but then the Germans do some very funny things at times. Thank you. Cheers, Kate.
Thanks.
Philip, someone's bought a pot of autumn bliss with 5 roots separated. They planted them, but only one has sprouted. Will the others come?
Doesn't sound very... I would have... Oh, dear. This takes me back. My father, they'd retired and moved down, and he was not a horticulturist. And you buy your raspberries as a clump of bare root, and I think there were 10 together, and he'd planted the whole clump as as a bush. He didn't realise that you were supposed to sort of pull them apart. One of the big problems with, I suspect this person has bought them as a clump of bare root, and they quite often dry out in the garden centre if they don't look after them well. So if you're buying online or from a garden centre a clump, a sort of, you know, a bunch of stems, then they do need 24-hour soaking before they're planted. And then having planted them freshly this year, because April has been so dry, I would certainly have been watering for the last few weeks to get the new growth. Certainly I wouldn't give up hope yet. Obviously one assumes that having planted them, he cut them back sort of 2 or 3 inches. Just keep that area watered. Mind you, Mother Nature might provide tonight, but I'm not sure it's going to be enough. So give it a good watering and see how it, I'd certainly give them another month and hope. So
it can be quite tricky with
crossed.
those though. I mean, because they do spread a lot. You might regret if all 5 came up with them, because they do spread quite a lot, don't they? The autumn bliss, they do run.
They do, yes. I mean, I've got 2 distinct rows of raspberries, one being summer, one being autumn, and they do try and fill the ground in between. And I'd sort of dig up ones from the sort of 4 foot between the 2 rows to gap up any spaces where something has died out. So yeah, they can take over.
Someone's asking, they have a Timperley early rhubarb and it's constantly putting up flowers. They've broken off 2 already this year. Why is that?
Rhubarb coming into flower usually is a sign of stress. It could well be because it has been so dry, and it's possibly in a rather dry situation. Mine, as I say, is planted beside the compost heap, the 6-foot square compost heap. There's 2 of them. The one compost heap will be carried on, built up for another sort of 3 or 4 weeks till we get towards the end of May. And then on that compost heap will be planted the courgettes. And the courgettes need a lot of water. So during the summer, I'm constantly, you know, on a daily basis, hot days, watering the courgettes, and so the excess water runs down and keeps the Timperley early. So it's a sign of stress. Water, mulch, feed. Right. But any rhubarb that starts producing flower spikes, just break the flower spike off.
Great. Linda, have you got a question?
Yes, I've got a couple actually. I've just had a polytunnel and I'm wanting to plant a peach and an apricot tree. I've had some recommendations of varieties. What would Philip recommend, and what rootstock to keep them reasonably contained? Because obviously I don't want to fill the polytunnel with the whole of a peach tree or an apricot tree.
I don't know how well they take to being grown in the polythene tunnel, because the polythene tunnel tends to be rather humid. If you look at the sort of the old National Trust houses, the sort of lean-to glass houses, they had tremendous ventilation. Polytunnels tend to be very humid, but yeah, make sure they're on a dwarfing rootstock. I assume as you haven't got a wall with a polythene tunnel, you're going to grow them as freestanding bushes.
That's what I'm hoping, yes, because obviously I don't want to block too much light out by having it fan trained, and I don't want it that close to the plastic.
Yeah, you've got nothing to train them against. So yeah, dwarfing rootstock, pick some of the modern varieties, and you know, make sure that both ends are open to get plenty of ventilation.
Yeah,
make sure they don't dry out.
Yeah, I've had the top of the 2. I've got double sliding doors at either end.
Yeah,
and I've had the top ones just as mesh at the moment. So I mean that's mesh all the time to stop insects in and what have you. Well, not to stop pollinators, but to stop larger insects and things. So I'm hoping that might keep some of the humidity down. But I mean, it is recommended, the polytunnel books say you can do it. So I thought, well, it's something I've never grown before.
Give it a whirl. That's the whole thing about
it's
gardening.
Getting hold of some at the minute, though. I don't seem to be able to find any but I'll try Pomona fruits. I've used them before for other things.
Whereabouts are you, Linda?
In Leicestershire.
Oh, I can't help you up that way. I don't think Frank Matthews' fruit trees probably get up as far as that. Have you got a good Dobbies near you?
We've got a Dobbies. I've been. They haven't got any.
Oh, okay. No, you possibly go mail order then.
Yes. Yeah.
Good luck, Linda.
Thank you.
Norma, have you got a question?
Well, just saying about the rhubarb. It does it every year, so I'm probably not looking after it very well. I don't seem to have an awful lot of success with rhubarb. I also bought a couple of years ago, what's it called? Something Surprise, Porton's Surprise, but it doesn't seem to get very big. It's a bit pathetic, really.
Oh,
That's
what?
supposed
Sorry?
to Porton's Surprise. It's supposed to fruit most of the year. You don't have to stop pulling it at a certain time.
Don't know that one at all. No, can't help you with that one. But mulch, feed, water.
Right.
India, I think you better.
I've been growing peach trees in pots, very big pots in the polytunnel, but I've always got one end open constantly.
Yeah.
One is that crimson leaf one.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Good luck to Linda with hers in her polythene tunnel. India, I think we probably better call it a night and let these people go and get themselves a drink somewhere.
Okie dokie, brilliant. Right, okay, thank you, Philip. That was a really fascinating talk. I was just going to ask one question for myself. Have you grown any aronia berries, chokeberries?
I do.
I tried, and they didn't grow very well. And what was produced, I thought, why am I growing this? So I tried, but do you find them any good?
I do, yeah. I mean, I grew, I think I've got 4 different varieties now, Nero, Higuan, and a few others. And it takes a bit of time for them to establish and get set up. But I've had some fantastic crops in some years, other years, 2 or 3 fruits, and then other years, hundreds and hundreds. But the reason I grow them is because they apparently have got the highest antioxidant level of a fruit on the planet. So super healthy for you.
Okay, well, I'll stick to my blackcurrants for my antioxidants and dark chocolate.
Fair enough. And I was just going to suggest to people as well, I know Philip mentioned quite a lot of varieties for things like red currants and gooseberries and whatnot. It's quite good if you can get them on a standard, because then they're obviously 3 or 4 foot high, so it makes the picking of the fruit easier. And pruning and various other things, so it's worth looking out for those. I bought mine from a discount supermarket.
Yeah,
quite cheaply.
Yes, red currants and gooseberries, but of course you can't do that really for black currants.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I've got quite a few on family rootstocks as well, family trees, which means you can have multiple varieties on the same tree.
Yes. I'm not keen on the family trees, but yeah, in a very small garden, perhaps it works. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
Have
Great.
you tried honeyberry?
Honeyberry, I tried those as well, and I was very disappointed.
Right, brilliant. Thank you, Philip. That was a really fascinating talk, and you can tell from the amount of questions that we had that people were really engaged with that. So thank you very much. Can I ask everybody to unmute themselves, please? And can I ask you all to give Philip a fantastic round of applause?
Thank you.
So, question 1. Ooh, before I give you the answers. Question. Did anybody get the first one? Animanthally, or whatever it is.
Steeper underneath, yeah.
Oh,
What
well
was the
done.
question?
Well done.
Pheasant grass, steeper undulatia.
Yeah, pheasant grass. Yeah,
Underneath.
steeper rundinaceae. Yeah, that was much easier to say than the new name. And the grafted pear tree, not grated. What will the fruit give you?
Probably a
Quince.
Yeah, yeah.
I think fruit pear trees are.
Yep, it'll give you a quince because it's grafted on a quince rootstock. And the last question was the fish oil supplements. What can you do if you're a vegetarian? Somebody did mention the answer actually. Do you want to say it?
The omega supplements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
What can you do?
so what you can do is you can get these.
Oil.
So these are algal tablets. So they're completely vegetarian, suitable for vegetarians and all sorts. And you need to find one that's got both omegas in there, both the fatty acids, DHA and EPA. It needs to have both of those on there. But if you look for something that's got algal oil in it, that's basically the vegetarian equivalent. Rightio, that was it. Well done, everybody. So thank you for that. I will say bye-bye now, and then I'll open up the breakout room. So otherwise, if you don't stay behind, I'll see you on
Bye,
the
Andy.
Bye.
right.